You worked in Babylon, which is now, as of 2019, UNESCO World Heritage Site. It wasn't then when you were working there. Let me ask you a question about that. Why would the US and the Polish army use it as a military camp?
I have no idea. The during the invasion, the first soldiers that arrived at the site were the U.S. Marines, and they had some manholes. They dug manholes, which makes sense, but only on the outskirts of the site. Maybe it was also a little bit inside, but that really did not do that much damage. Now, who took the decision to make that a regional headquarters? I don't know. I never could find out. I tried actually, but I never could find out who did that. Then the region was under Polish control, so the commander was a Polish general. So that's actually the situation that I entered. The point was that my predecessors in the Bahraini was already very upset about the regional headquarters at Babylon, and she convinced the ambassador, the US ambassador, to do something about it, to get the military out. Now, you see, there was a dual, and you find that in the history of the occupation too, there was a dual command system. First, you had the State Department, the Foreign Affairs, read embassy, and then you had the military. Now, in that struggle within the Bush government, the military, they won. If you read that history, before the invasion, etc., you see that there was a constant clash between staff from the military, the Pentagon, and staff from the State Department. And the State Department did have at least a little bit better ideas before the invasion, actually, in protecting the cultural heritage site in Iraq once Iraq would be invaded by the US. But it was all down the drain. So with a constant fight. Now, because I was a military, reserve officer actually, and also an officer, and that was one of the advantages, I could go to the high command of the US troops in Baghdad, which I did. And it didn't take me very long to convince them to keep up or to leave the site and put the regional military command somewhere else, which became Divania. They were definitely fully cooperating on that. So in general, when Americans say, okay, we'll do it, they will do it. In order to get them that far, that's a different story. I mean, it was 24/7 to get to change the military command from Babil to the Divania. It took in the end $200 million, and it took them 6 months, actually, more or less 6 months to move everything. Meanwhile, the minister asked me to go over to Babylon together with his staff from the SBAH and sort of negotiate. And especially his intake, his main interest was what kind of damage was there and who done it. Now, he said, because in the light of the future, I'm not that much interested in the persons who did the damage, who caused the damage, but I'm more interested in an inventory of the damage at the Babylon site. And then he had good contact with the British Museum, and John Curtis, he knew personally, and actually, Donnie George also knew John Curtis. Yeah, that was the way it went. And they invited John Curtis to come over. Actually, first, the minister invited UNESCO to come over to oversee the inventory of the damage at the Babylon site. Then you have to remember the UN headquarters was blown up in Baghdad before, which killed actually the ambassador, the UNESCO ambassador there. So all UN staff was forbidden to go to Iraq, including staff of UNESCO. So that was a dead end. And then they found John Curtis, who was willing to come over and oversee the damage. So we had a group of people to inventory the damage. We had the local inspector of archaeology there at Babil, and especially the Babylon site, Miriam something. There were the Poles there, and the headquarters also, the regional headquarters also included 2 archaeologists, but actually they were PhD students, militarized PhD students. So also reserve officers. They tried, but they were young. They didn't know much about the circumstances. They did have knowledge of some of the, let's say, technical archaeological knowledge on Babylon, but that was it. And they had no power whatsoever. They just did not have no power. But they cooperated and they were willing. So they gave us a report when we arrived. And then, of course, there was the staff of the SBAH and the Archaeological Service. And actually, I went over with the minister a couple of times. Now, before you get to a point that everything was okay in the handing over of the site to the SBAH, many things happened. First of all, the Polish commander who got educated in Moscow didn't want to move the site, to move the regional headquarters. Very easy. So I went back to the high command, the US high command in Baghdad, and I said, look, guys, I've got a problem here. And he's under your control. So what are you going to do? So they sent with me a 1-star general. Didn't help. Then they sent a 2-star general. Didn't help either. So then I said to the minister, yeah, this is going to be troublesome. It's going to be trouble. I spoke to the political advisor of the Polish commander in Babylon. It's getting a little bit complicated, but this is the way it worked. And he was an ambassador, actually, but now in the position of a political advisor. And he was the former Polish ambassador in Yemen. And I could deal with him, but he was sort of a sneaky, so I had to be careful with him. So then the minister, Al-Jazari and I sat around the table and said, look, why don't you call up your colleague in Warsaw and, present him with the problem. Then I think it went a little bit different. I'm not quite sure. I have to look at my notes to get everything straight. But I think the Minister of Defense in Warsaw was approached, I think by the Americans, I'm not quite sure. He went to the Ministry of Culture in Warsaw and he went down to the commander and then everything was arranged. So then the Polish commander of the regional headquarters at Babylon was ready to move the regional headquarters. Then we still had this committee to establish the damage. We had a lot of discussions there. One of the things is the Iraqis were not allowed to go into the palace. Saddam built this palace worth $200,000. He only visited it once or twice within the site of the Babylon. Actually met a couple of people who cooperated on building the palace. But it was close to Iraqis because the Poles didn't trust the Iraqis. And I said, well, today you will trust them and you will open the doors. Very simple. And I think they were sort of scared of me. I'm not quite sure. I'm a little bit confusing now, but you have to see that with all the different parties sort of choose me to become the secretary of this committee or the leader of the committee. So it naturally went that way. Not quite sure why, but this is what happened. So everybody was looking at me. Anyway, the doors were opened and I said, well, there were intelligence units here. Then close the door. no, we going in. This is the palace of the Iraqis, and the Iraqis have the right to enter this palace. Basta. So we did. Then, of course, we had to, later we had discussions with the minister on what do you want to do with the palace. I said, make it into a hotel. He said, nah, we better make it into a knowledge center, an heritage knowledge center, which in the end, I agreed with him, actually. So then there were all kinds of things that the military wanted to break down, like the fences. I said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And everything was discussed within this group of people wandering around the site of Babylon to establish the damage. And so we made sort of a contract of what to leave at the Babylon site, the fences, the watchtowers. I mean, it was to the benefit of the protection of the site. Also, after the regional command moved to Diwania. So we decided with everybody what the Iraqis wanted to leave, which we did. Then there was the problem, of course, of the oil spills that were there. Many of us thought that, quite a lot of damage was either done by nature. For example, the breaking of the beams in the certain houses that were reconstructed already under Saddam at the site. That was heavy rains, and it was not very well done. Then there was definitely some damage done with the helicopter site on the Babylon in Babylon. It was actually started as a parking lot already in the times of Saddam, when he so-called restored or rebuilt Babylon, for example, the Greek theater. And I met a woman who was actually heading the reconstruction, quotation marks, of the Greek theater, and she excused herself. And I told her, well, don't excuse yourself. You probably couldn't do anything under these circumstances. But a lot of actually was concrete that was used for the so-called reconstruction of the Greek theater. And he needed that for the Babylon Festival by Saddam. He used cultural heritage to strengthen his power. So there were the difficulties in trying to figure out who was caused, well, actually what damage was and who caused it. Also, the Paradise Road that leads to the main gate to the Babylon site, at least the way it is constructed now. It's covered by ceramic tiles, big ceramic tiles, and most of them were broken. Now, the Iraqis said it was done by the military, and most of us thought that it was done just by nature, by heavy rains. At the end of the Paradise Road, there were concrete blocks to stop anybody getting in. And the idea was to get rid of them. But I said, well, you cannot use this road. You cannot use a heavy truck to go up to these concrete blocks and put them on the lorries. You cannot do that. It will damage the tiles again. So then I asked the Poles if they had a helicopter, and they said yes. But I said, well, can you lift those blocks? No. Then I turned to the Americans. I said, you have heavy helicopters. Can you do it? Yes, we can do it. So that was done. So the blocks at the end of the Paradise Road were lifted by a helicopter, put on a truck, which was on the asphalt road nearby. So that's actually what happened. The question you asked me about if there was illegal digging on Babylon, the answer is very simple. No, there was not. The first to arrive at Babylon were the US Marines, and indeed they set up defense ditches and dug some manholes, according to the SBAH report. Much damage, however, especially the digging of ditches for defense purposes and moving and flattening land by both the coalition forces and KBR, was done in the site after 2003. but no illegal diggings. This was all confirmed by the different audit reports when the minister, which the minister set up. It was an international audit with representatives of the SBAH, the chief inspector of Babylon, Dr. Miriam Moussa, representatives of the US Embassy, the Polish military delegation, which included actually 3 archaeological PhD students. And they gave a very extensive report of 500 pages. Then also people from the Ministry of Culture and the Military Command and the British Museum John Curtis, which was specially done on request of the minister because UNESCO could not come because nobody of the UN staff was able to enter Iraq because of security reasons. And they all delivered their reports, and that was actually the basis of the UNESCO ICC Babylon Committee, which was created afterwards and of which I was a member. And they came up with different recommendations. So that is that, yeah. Another thing is the only ones who could actually do some illegal diggings at Babylon were the Poles, the Polish army. But I read the report again, and there's no evidence that they did any excavations in Babylon. As a matter of fact, they put quite a lot of money in reconstruction of equipment projects for the modern buildings on the site of Babylon and in the province Babil and elsewhere. So they did put an effort to reconstruct, or at least to rehabilitate some of the buildings, but not the antiquities.
Just on that point, were SBAH staff, so the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage staff, did they have free access to the whole site when you were there?
No. That was one of the points, because in the surroundings of Babylon, there were still attacks from quotation mark insurgents. So it was heavily guarded, especially on the outside. Now, when we did the audit, I wanted to see the palace, but there was Secret Service of the military in the palace, and also especially the room with a lot of the communication room with a lot of radar information, etc., etc. So that was, according to the Polish military, impossible for us to enter the palace. I said, well, then you close the door. After all, the palace is part of Babylon, and the Iraqis should have access to everything they want. So it happened. So we went into the palace to see what was going on there. And only one room, the door was closed, and that was the room with all the communication equipment. So for the rest, we could enter wherever we wanted to.
On the issue of the palace, was it looted in 2003?
That I don't know. There was looting on the site, and that was done by the by the people in the surroundings, people from Hilla and other people. I mean, the site was already encroached by local farmers and villages which was around the site. So the locals did enter the site after 2003 and after the invasion. So everything was cleared. And with that, I mean, all equipment was gone, pipings, you name it, office equipment, everything was gone. So for example, most of the palace was just totally bare. There was nothing there except for what the Poles brought in. And that was also the case with other modern buildings around the palace, for example. There were quite a few of buildings to house the staff of Saddam. So everything was just bare. There's nothing there. Everything was ripped, just like in Baghdad with the library and the museums, etc.
When you were there, did you hear of looting, archaeological looting outside the main city of Babylon, in other sites of Babylon?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That was the case.
Oh yeah. We made an estimation, but that is more like, well, let's say not based on facts. But the main sites were looted very much. In fact, insofar that people came up with guns, the looters. And what Elizabeth Stone said is that they first dug straight down into the ground, and then on horizontal level they dig some yeah, they started digging to find, yeah, to look for gold mainly, or anything that was interesting for the illegal artifacts trade, and especially cuneiform tablets and ivory and things like that. And they came with heavy equipment. I mean, there are enough evidence, also pictures of that. So, which I just said, which I told you earlier, it was very important to give the inspectors and the staff of the provincial inspectors equipment to, first of all, defend themselves, connect them to, so we gave them guns and connect them to a nearby military base, a US military base, so that they could come out and defend the site. And also, which I said earlier, we gave them communication equipment so they could communicate not only with their own people and between themselves, but also with the nearby US military base. There was a point to connect the US Army with the staff of the inspectorate, because nobody trusted each other. So we actually went down, and in one case, I don't remember which one that was, but yeah, that was in Hila. I introduced the Iraqi staff and the inspectorate to the local US base in order to sort of, started trusting each other. They also got, the staff also got flak jackets, I remember that, and helmets and stuff like that. So that definitely helped to defend the biggest sites, at least. On a little bit more on Babylon, the one inspector, and this is about the palace, is which we talked about earlier, is one of the points is that actually Saddam only slept there once, and it costed $200 million. And one of the details is that there was a staircase built in the palace, which was built in green marble, but Saddam didn't like the color. So they ripped down the whole staircase, which was in, near the entrance. It was just one big sort of Hollywood movie staircase. And they rebuilt it with the proper green marble. So just a total waste of money.
200 million?
Yeah, $200 million for the whole palace to build, yes.
There were several parties that completed assessments. I mean, there was the Polish assessment of the damage. There was the State Department funded assessment, John Russell, and there was obviously the UNESCO one, which was the one with, which was the final summary, I think, one of that John Curtis completed.
That was not UNESCO. That was the ICC Babylon Committee.
Yeah.
No, actually the report that John made was actually for the British Museum.
Yeah.
Then later John became also a member of the ICC.
Okay. And then there was also an Italian...
Miriam, her report.
And Iraqi. There was the SBH, Miriam's report.
Yeah.
I mean, when we look back at those reports...
Well, can I make a remark on that?
Yeah,
because in my experiences before in other countries, I noticed that a lot of people, for example, I gave a lecture at the university in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and nobody had any paper or any pencil with them. And I told them, well, how are you going to remember what I'm saying? And so they started laughing. I said, well, I will start the seminar when everybody comes back with paper and pencils. And they looked at me like, this guy is nuts, which is true, by the way. But anyway, so when I found out that was I sort of, put in this senior position within the Babylon Committee to establish the damage, I especially asked the Iraqi people to make notes themselves and to share those notes with us as we would share the notes with them. Because I made notes on every visit and distributed them to everybody else because I knew this was a weakness. So when finally we asked a final report from the Iraqis, they were sort of coming up with empty-handed until finally the chief inspector, the main inspector of archaeology there, came up with a rather weak report.
But there's been no compensation. There has been no compensation, even there has been damage, but there was no compensation in what now 18, 17 years since that damage. So one has to ask, okay, the damage was documented, but there was no any kind of effort to hold anyone to account. And it's not just Babil or Babylon, but there were other sites, as you know. I mean, you worked on other sites too. I mean, on other sites, you said you worked on the Melwiya, Samara, with the sniper situation. Could you tell us about that? Because, and then we'll go back to a bit about Babil. I have one question about that. So you just tell us a bit about that.
Well, about compensation. Every commander in the field of at least of the US, I know that, and I think also the UK, which was mainly present in Basra, if they killed somebody, a civilian, collateral damage, quotation marks again, they would compensate the family a little bit. So they would give them money. Why that did not happen in the case of damage to archaeological sites or even museums or libraries, I'm not quite sure. There was a lot of money running around, which I was not aware of until afterwards, when I left the country. That was available within the army with different kind of funds. I mean, I've been looking at the different funding of the projects. School libraries were repaired and funded by units themselves, military units themselves. To get an overview, and I tried again some time ago, and it's next to impossible to see where all those funds came from. There's no overview. Actually, we tried. I told the minister to make an overview of the funds so we could use them. And one of his advisors started doing that, and he had the same idea. It was the Iraqi advisor to the minister, who unfortunately got killed later. My friend that I talked about, who got killed actually, was an advisor of the Ministry of Culture, and his name was Kamil Shia. And I told you we were very good friends. We saw each other definitely once, a couple of times on my instigation, but he had the same idea actually. We started putting together a sheet of all the money that, all the projects. We needed a list of projects actually, because the ministry was not very well organized, and we did not have control over what was going on in the culture sector, and certainly not in the cultural heritage sector. So I proposed a list of projects in the cultural heritage sector and where the money came from and how much money it was. And he put that together actually. So he was a very efficient person with modern ideas. Yeah, and actually afterwards we met a couple of times in Erbil, and actually very used to live with his family in Brussels as well. So I was very sorry that he got shot, but he didn't want any protection. Samara Al-Mawiya. On January 1 or 2 of 2005, a picture appeared in the Wall Street Journal of a sniper on top of Al-Mawiya in Samara. And everybody was getting upset. Actually, the press officer, the main press officer, came to me and he said, "What is this?" I said, "Well, it's an archaeological site. You know, the sniper has no place, no place of being there. He will attract fire from the insurgents," quotation marks again. Samara is an important archaeological site. So then I called UNESCO and I said, can you give me the details? Because I need to reach out to the local commander at Samara to get the sniper off. And I need evidence. I need, information on the site. And actually, they didn't come up with enough information. So I also asked the SBA agent, Tony George, give me information. I need to know. And I never got clear information. And it took a month, maybe even longer, before I really knew what was, how important Amalia was. And actually, from the outside, it looks new. But the nucleus is very old. And it was restored again, quotation marks, in Saddam times. So it is an old structure, but it looks a little bit new from the outside because it was restored. Once I got that information, I went to the command general. He didn't really want to move, so I went back to the high command in Baghdad, etc. And I finally got things going. I was helped by an archaeologist in France, a colleague, who gave me very good information as well. And so in the end, we got the sniper off. Took a while, too long actually. I also had the help of an officer that was in my office from the Civil Affairs Unit, the US Civil Affairs Unit. I told him to go have a look at the site and to see if the sniper is still there. So we organized a helicopter, and then helicopters always go by two because of security reasons. So I managed that, and I sent him to to have a look and make pictures. So when he came back that evening, it was very clear that the sniper was still there. So I called up the local commander, US commander again, and I said, he's got to get off. And he got a message from the high command.
This was an American sniper.
Yeah.
But the Meluia, was it also damaged by insurgent attacks?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the insurgents, how do you say, hit the tower, well, in order to hit the sniper, with artillery shells. Whatever you call it, I don't remember the English word now.
Yeah.
Yes, so the proof was there. Later on, I had a discussion again with the French archaeologist, a colleague. He said, why didn't you demand that all the troops were leaving the site? And actually, he was right. I did not, because I had too little information, and maybe also too little knowledge. I'm not quite sure. Maybe both. But the first thing was to get the sniper off al-Malawiya. Actually, when I left on March 5, 2005, that Amalia was handed over to the mayor of Samara. They had a party, and then I think a month later or so, the tower was heavily damaged again by the insurgents.
And then, I mean, you mentioned some of this in your article, Embedded Archaeology, an exercise in self-reflection. In the book, The Destruction of Cultural Heritage in Iraq, by Peter Stone, and Joanne Bergelli, with a foreword by Robert Fisk. I mean, can I just read something here? Mm-hmm. You say here, I mean, this is actually going to regarding al-Hatra. We managed to cut the force of the explosions by half and set up a monitoring system on al-Hatra with the help of the University of Mosul. Could you tell us a bit more about Hatra?
Well, a depot, an ammunition, a Saddam ammunition depot was discovered close to the al-Hatra site, I think 20 kilometers away from it. And the Americans wanted to get rid of it, of course. So they dug big holes, put the ammunition in there, and exploded it. Now, what happened is because of geological reasons, it was sand. The tremblations reached al-Hatra site and damaged it. So you saw on a few columns of the Greek-Roman site very clearly that it was damaged because the people from Mosul University sent me the pictures, and actually the message that this was going on was done by a professor of history who was part of a civil affairs U.S. unit. And he noticed that the site was damaged and he contacted me. Now that was very good. So then things started going. Now then I had an communication with a lieutenant colonel, U.S. lieutenant colonel, who was probably also involved in the ammunition depot and dismantling it, which was at the U.S. Embassy in the palace. And he started interfering. And I mean, clearly, this American soldier and me came from different planets. We communicated very badly. We didn't know each other, we didn't understand each other very well. Now, my demand was to find a solution for the for the ammunition explosions. I have to think, the right order. Actually, that was the time. This was already December, I think, 2004, and I was going on Christmas leave, my first and only leave actually during the 7 months I was in Baghdad. So I told this particular person not to do anything until I was coming back. What happened, I got a call from the US Embassy when I was back in the Netherlands, and this particular colonel went to the media and said that everything was okay. So I got all upset. So right away I called the US Embassy and the persons I knew, and I told the commander, his commander, I think, to get rid of the guy and shut him up, which happened. I never saw him again. Then when I went back to Baghdad again after my my little vacation during Christmas, I checked. Actually, I wanted to go to al-Hatra. That was already earlier. Sorry for the confusion. This shows you a little bit live at an embassy and working with colleagues. I wanted to see the damage myself and possibly solve the situation as very quickly. And I had this civil affairs unit cooperating with me in the neighborhood of al-Hatra. So I organized a helicopter flight to go over there and discuss things together with the university people from Mosul. They would go to the site as well. So we could discuss the damage and could inventory the damage and see how we could stop that. Now that helicopter in the last moment, the day before I was going to that area, was actually stolen by a junior. The ride was stolen by a junior member of the staff who I told him that I was going to al-Hatra the next day. This shows you the competition and the unfairness between different members of the staff at the US Embassy. So I never got there. Actually, that convoy that was going, it went through anyway. It was going to al-Hatra, was attacked on the way. So to some extent, I was lucky too, because I was not in the convoy and didn't had to, wasn't afraid for my life. How do you say that? I escaped. To continue on al-Hatra, the result actually of my interference in al-Hatra, which was damaged by the nearby ammunition depot, Saddam. I think it was 20 to 30 kilometers anyway. I did not manage to cut the entire program of explosions of the ammunition depot, because you could not move the ammunition. It was too old and too dangerous, so you had to do something with it. But I did manage actually to cut down the explosions by half. And at the same time, the Mosul University started monitoring the site and went over there very quickly and installing equipment to measure the trembulations, because that was the main problem actually at al-Hatra. To put up video cameras, and they went over there every once in a while. So that's how far I got. Sometimes you want more, but you don't get it. That's very simple. But I was already glad, first of all, to get the Mosul University involved. They were very willing to cooperate there, and they really were worried about the site. And well, at least half of the explosions were cut.
You mean half the explosions that were planned?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But in those three cases, I mean, we've looked at Babylon, Hatra, in Nineveh, and the Melwiya. I mean, you say here in your article, the embedded archaeology article, I always realized that the military were part of the problem in that they were responsible, at least in part, for the destruction of Iraq's cultural heritage. I mean, this was just general ignorance of cultural heritage. Do you think this was the reason, or do you think it's because of just the presence of the military? It wasn't just the ignorance, but just the fact that military institutions do not do heritage, do not do history and archaeology. And I mean, you've written this article, the embedded archaeology. Could you tell us a bit about that? Because obviously that links into what the question is about, which is the role of the archaeologist, the role of the heritage expert that you wrote about here. And you write here also several archaeologists refused to go to Iraq, but I guess your presence was important because you were there working with the military, or at least working to monitor the US military in particular. I mean, could you tell us about your ideas regarding this? Because I think this is an important debate that happened, but also now.
First of all, the invasion in Iraq was illegal. We knew that, and actually my son organized a protest march and a demonstration here in Utrecht, which I joined actually. So I knew that. I also knew that I would be part of the military machine, if you want to call it that way. So I was, I had that particular responsibility as well. The military were the problem, especially after Bremer, which of course was the US embassy, took these wrong decisions to get rid of the Baath Party members everywhere and dissolve the army. So throughout my time, the war got worse. Especially the Sunnis, but also the Shiites took up the arms. So in that sense, the presence of the US Army definitely made things worse. And of course, these three examples you just mentioned, al-Hatra, Samara, and Babylon, are definitely a very direct example of damage caused by the US Army presence or what they did. But it was clear from the beginnings, definitely reading afterwards on the war in Iraq, that it was the Bush government did not have any intention to take care of cultural heritage in spite of what everything was going on. It's like Rumsfeld, the Minister of Defense said, well, shit happens. When they discovered the broken vase of, what was it called? Well, anyway, my presence there, I think it was a successful mission. Yes, because first of all, I was Dutch. Nobody cared about my presence. Second of all, I had a lot of power, more power than I ever had. I could do things. I was very happy. Now, to be happy afterwards doesn't mean that everybody else around you was happy. And I mean, not my family here back in the Netherlands, but the people back in Iraq. When I met the minister later, after I returned, and I met him at some kind of UNESCO meeting, he said, well, René, when I asked him, what did you think of my presence there? He said, well, I never trusted you. I said, well, thank you very much. I said, you were from the US Embassy. So I said, yeah, okay, I can see that. So being attached to the US Embassy, although I'm a foreigner, not an American, was not very favorable. Being a military was definitely very favorable. I could never have done the things, and especially in al-Hatra, Samara, and Babylon, without if I had if I had been a civil servant. I couldn't reach the military. Although my rank as an officer was not that high, I was a major. I had a high VIP position, the equivalent of a 2-star general. They told the ambassador told me, my boss. That helped. So yes, on the one hand, my military position did help me to get the things done. Later on, how I ended up in the ICC committees of UNESCO was because the Iraqi colleagues requested UNESCO to put me on these committees, because except for the minister who didn't trust me quite well, the other people, especially the SVAH and the staff, and also to some extent the librarians, did acknowledge or did approve of the things I did in Iraq, and that I was an asset to the protection of cultural heritage in Iraq.
And in terms of, when we're speaking here about the certain, the things you accomplished or achievements, what would be, when looking back now, I mean, it's 18 years now since the US invasion, I guess, you were there, 2003, 4 and 5, so a bit less than that. I mean, you've had time to self-reflect. You've had a significant time to look back at that period, and also in your book, in your article, and there's a lot of self-reflection. I know you've told me you've suffered from stress, from post-traumatic stress. I guess it's very common for a lot of people working in war zones or conflict or fragile contexts.
Well, if I look back at it, first of all, and especially later on when with a Syrian colleague, we started Heritage for Peace, I think my presence in Iraq as a military reserve officer, responsible for the safeguarding of cultural heritage at that time, was successful. Now, the CIMIC units more or less is dissolved in the Netherlands Army. It's called different names now. I would not join the Dutch military at this particular moment, because the goals and the aims of the civil affairs unit has been so inflated within the Dutch army that I definitely would not go with them to do anything. Besides that, 2 years after Iraq, I joined the military as a senior cultural advisor to the commander of South Afghanistan, and I was stationed for 6 months in Kandahar, and that was a total disaster. Because I was so much attached to the military, although with the highest in command, there's not much I could do. I did not have that freedom that much power. That's why I never wrote about it, actually, because to me that mission was a failure. I tried, but I did not succeed to do much there. Few things here and there. After I came back, I stayed on for I think a half year, maybe a year, and then I quit the army. So was it worthwhile? Yeah, at that time, yes. Would I do it again? Not within the present conditions. First of all, the Iraq war was a preemptive war. It was not approved by any international recognized and legal multilateral organizations such as the UN or the EU. Only afterwards it was recognized as such. So that is a condition for me now, which I wrote later. Anybody who wants to join the military as an anthropologist, archaeologist, or whatever, it can only be after an approved mission by this kind of body. That is at least the first thing you should consider. Second, yeah, so would I do it again? At that time, yes. Considering the circumstances, it worked. Would I do it again? Now, under the certain conditions we have now, no. Is it important for people to join the army in a heritage position? That depends. First of all, you know, the mission should be approved by the UN. You could join a UN peace mission. Why not? What we did prove at the time is that the heritage community should not wait until everything is destroyed after an armed conflict. And that did change. So now people, and including UNESCO, is convinced that they should interfere during a conflict to safeguard or protect the cultural heritage. That is definitely a change. And maybe it was because I was there in Iraq. Then as an anthropologist, there's a discussion of anthropologists joining the army. Actually, there's an anthropologist within the Dutch army. I would never go into the army as an anthropologist because we've seen that famous anthropologists like Margaret Mead and others actually went, I think it was Margaret Mead who went to Vietnam to make an inventory of the tribal areas. And that became part of the operations of war. Now, that is totally ridiculous. There have been a couple of books written about that. And actually, just recently, there appeared in a publication in a Polish magazine and a journal, which is again rather conservative. And they're talking about military archaeology. Normally, I would understand military archaeology as the archaeology of military sites in the past. But he makes it equal to archaeologists working within the military. Now, if you discuss this at this moment with colleagues from the US and to some extent from UK, that's a totally different story. I would not agree with them. They went a different way, which I would not. Then again, would I teach the military? Yes, I would. Blue Shield, for example, definitely Blue Shield UK and international, send over people to teach the military how to protect cultural heritage in times of war. Most of them know a little bit about international humanitarian war and some of the international heritage law. So that definitely, yeah, of course, you should share your ideas with anybody. Yeah. When I arrived, apparently there was, I had the availability of $15,000 that was destined to use to buy stolen antiquities. That wasn't much money. And to tell you the truth, I didn't like the program because if you buy back objects or whatever from the antiquities from the market, in my view at that time, it would stimulate the looting and offering antiquities for sale. Anyway, the general director of the INLA, Asad
Saad Iskandar.
He asked for the money because he was buying back all kinds of archives and books that he knew that came from the library in Al-Mutanaba Street in the book market. So there wasn't much, and a lot of it he paid out of his own pocket. So I gave part of the money to him to stimulate him to buy back some of the stolen contents from the library and archives. But when I went back, there was still a lot of money left. I think about $9,000 or something like that. So I didn't quite use much of it. I returned it to the staff of the embassy. Later on, I got into trouble because the people back in Washington asked me, "Where is that money?" Well, you have to know that if you read the reports of the controllers at that time, the inspectorate, you see that a lot of things and a lot of money, especially oil money, was stolen. Just disappeared, fell off the truck, if you if you want to use that term. So fortunately, I drew up a paper before I left and handed over the money to this particular person of the staff and had him sign for it. So I could produce that and send it back to Washington, so I was in the clear. Another point on looting is that on instigation of one member of civil affairs, the lawyer, but what is his name? Anyway, there was a return program for antiquities that anybody who would return stolen, quotation mark, objects to the museum would not get prosecuted and would get a return of a certain percentage of the value of the object. And in that case, the vase of Varka, one of the earliest surviving narrative relief sculpture, famous for Iraq, was returned. But Donnie George told me how that went, and that's a nice story, I think, to share with you. Is that two brothers, stole that vase from the National Museum. And once they got home with the vase, the mother got very upset, and she said she didn't agree with it and that the boys should return that vase to the National Museum, which they refused to do. And then she told the boys, well, in that case, I'm refusing to take care of you. You cook your own meals, you do your own laundry, etc. And she convinced in that way to the boys to return the vase to the museum. And that was very, very funny. I think it was a good program. I did not much agree with it at the beginning, but it did make a lot of sense, actually. Regarding the Iraq Museum and the buyback program, as it is called, actually, Colonel Bogdanos, you know, from the famous book Thieves of Baghdad, it was his idea to come up with that kind of program. Now, the question is, how effective was that? And I think I told you earlier that I was not a very much a proponent of that program, because maybe it was too theoretical, but in theory, at least, it would stimulate the market of illicit trade. But I must say, in this case, it did work, actually. And officially, it's actually called the amnesty program. Now, I looked up some numbers, and through the amnesty program, 60 of the 40 highly priced stolen artifacts from the public galleries were recovered this way. So it is, you know, over 40%. And I'm talking about things like the vase of Varka, the mask of Varka, the famous lyre, etc. You know, the music instrument. Continuing on this subject is what was actually stolen and that was actually why Bogdanos came to Iraq. He was a prosecutor in New York, actually. And his job was to make an inventory of the stolen artifacts from the Iraq Museum and try to get them back. Now he made a division in the different holdings within the museum. So according to him, 3,000 artifacts from the above ground rooms was recovered as well, which means 2/3 through the amnesty program, and the others were done by seizures. So they were confiscated by the military. From the underground, and that is different storage, only 1/5, which 20% was recovered, one way or the other. And in general, he continues, about roughly 35% of the stolen objects known as of December 2003 were recovered through this particular amnesty program. So in the end, I think it was a very good program. And well, I told you one of the stories of the two brothers and how the vase of Warka returned to the museum. And that was only because of the amnesty program.
Was the amnesty program open also for archives that were lost or stolen? And was it also open for things like paintings, which were also stolen at the time?
That I don't know. A lot of the paintings were in private galleries. And we know that from the beginning, actually just right after the invasion, a lot of paintings were stolen. Just military just went in and confiscated the paintings, etc. I've seen some of the paintings in the museums. I don't think neither the paintings or the archives were part of that particular program. But I told you earlier that the embassy gave me $15,000 to do my own buyback program, if you want. And Dr. Saad Iskander, the general director of the archives, National Archives and Museum and library, he made use of that to some extent. So I don't think it was part of what Bogdanos had in mind.
And why was that? Why was the focus only on the Iraq Museum or artifacts, antiquities, rather than the entirety of the cultural objects that were being looted and stolen at the time? We know, for example, that there were thousands of very important, significant art pieces from the Institute of Fine Arts, I believe, which belongs to the Ministry of Culture, that was looted at the time. You know about that. So why was the focus just on the Iraq Museum? Was it because of the international media attention on the Iraq Museum at the time? Or was it just because the US at that time was only concerned with, Iraq Museum objects?
Well, in general, in the cultural heritage sector, which is not officially, but which is my experience, is that there is a division, there's a hierarchy within the institutions and also the artifacts. On the top is always the museums. Secondly, there are the monuments, and then the archaeological sites, and at the bottom are the libraries, and at the most bottom are the archives. So in general, people are more interested in artifacts stolen from museums than books stolen from libraries or archives stolen from an archive. Then again, as you said, all the attention of the international media went to the Iraq Museum and to the archaeological sites. That is what appeared in the media. So everybody thought that was the worst that could happen, which was, of course, a terrible thing. But nobody knows that 90% of the photographic collection and the magazine collection of the INLA, the Library and Archives, were plundered or were burned. People are apparently not that much interested in there. in general, if you later, my experience is that, well, it's also actually within the UNESCO structure, because the culture division of UNESCO is about museums and about archaeological sites to some extent, and to monuments. But libraries and archives is part of the communication and information part of UNESCO. So it's not considered culture in that sense. But there is already a division within the UNESCO, which makes it very difficult. And in all the ICC committees I attended and the meetings in UNESCO, this difference is always there. Now, the International Federation of Library Associations, the IFLA, and the ICA, the International Council of Archives, are often then not present at those kind of important meetings. For example, the first meeting of the ICC committee on Haiti, my idea was to get the government together, meaning to collect the archives, which were all distributed all around the ministries in the ruins, to collect them and restore them so that the government, would function again. And that just simply did not happen, because the Americans, which were actually leading the rehabilitation of Haiti after the earthquake, didn't think it was very interesting to do that. So, in general, after my stay in Baghdad, my experience was the same. Nobody really cared about the archives and libraries, and about the fine arts, I don't know. Well, that's all. Yeah, what I know about it.
Who was in charge of the program?
Donny George.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many pieces did you, at least within the time you were there, do you remember how many pieces were returned?
No, I don't know, but there were quite a few. There are numbers on it. And it was rather substantial. It went into the thousands, actually. Yeah. And also Donny showed me that there was a lot of funny stuff going on of what was stolen from the National Museum. And in fact, it was, relatively speaking, not that much, because they took very good precautions. They sealed off certain rooms. They hid the entrances to certain departments, hiding in the sense they built brick walls that the entrances were not detectable, if you want. They were not to be seen. It was only that the cuneiform collection was really totally stolen. And that must have been somebody from the inside, because the doors were welded. The entrance was very well hidden, and only a few people knew about it. So in that sense, it was probably stolen by somebody who knew, maybe from the staff or whatever. Then he was smart enough, because he was at that time the head of the director of the museum, to take all these precautions. And he even showed me a hidden vault. It doesn't make sense to tell you where that was, but it was definitely very well hidden, and only 2 or 3 people knew about it. And that was never discovered. So it was very smart in doing that.